RX-8 sway bars for your NC, MX-5, or Miata. These are a super common, affordable upgrade. Probably one of the first mods you'd want to do once you get your NC, if it's bone stock. And we're going to talk about what the different options you have are. Red dot, yellow dot, orange dot, what do all these terms mean? What exactly would be the right combination of front and rear bar for you, for the kind of driving you do, for the road conditions, and for your personal preference. So let's get into it. So why even think about RX-8 sway bars for your NC, MX-5, or Miata? Well, RX-8s are generally costly vehicles to keep on the road compared to other regular piston engine vehicles. I work at a used car dealership where we specialize in Japanese sports cars, and more than any other vehicle, the number one vehicle that we see roll in on a flatbed truck is the RX-8. The RX-8 is also the vehicle that we do more engine swaps in, and I'm not talking about swaps where you pull it out and put an LS in it. I'm talking about warranty jobs where we're swapping the original RX-8 engine for a rebuilt RX-8 engine. And we do that more than we do for any other vehicle. In fact, I think I've only ever, in the last 1 year that I've been working there, I've only ever seen engine swaps on RX-8s. What that means is that they're costly to keep on the road, and because of that, a lot of them end up being broken or wrecked for parts. Because of that, parts are pretty cheap and easy to come by. Now that is probably going to change, and it has been changing over the last couple of years as RX-8s become fewer in number, and where the supply is kind of coming down to meet or close that gap between the excess of supply and the demand for people who actually love RX-8s and are enthusiastic about these vehicles. At least for right now, OEM RX-8 sway bars are fairly cheap and easy to get your hands on compared to going, straight aftermarket sway bars for your NC, MX-5, or Miata. The thing to note though, RX-8 sway bars are not adjustable. But if adjustability is something really important to you, then I would recommend looking at H&R, IBOC, and options like that. For me, I prefer the whole set it and forget it sort of ordeal with sway bars. At least I don't want to be messing around with them. So I decided to go with the RX-8 bars, and plus overall I spent about $100 on both the fronts and the rears. So let's look at a little chart that I've made to kind of outline what your options are and how to identify them when you're looking on the used market. In the leftmost column, I've written the outside and inside diameters of each of the sway bars. I've separated them for the fronts and the rears. The way I've written it is OD, outside diameter, stroke ID, inside diameter. So for example, if you look over here, this means that the outside diameter is 25.4 millimeters and the inside diameter is 18.8 millimeters. And I've done the same for all of them. Where I wasn't able to find the information online, I've just written a question mark. So if anybody knows what goes into those question mark areas, please let me know in the comments below. That's going to help the community a ton. Let's talk about inside-outside diameter. For those who are not sure what that's referring to, if you take your typical sway bar, let's say it looks something like this, and let's say you cut it right down the middle, this is what you're going to see as the cross-section. The outside diameter is going to be this distance here, and the inside diameter is going to be this distance here. And this kind of shaded area, this is going to be the wall thickness of the sway bar. So if this diameter gets smaller, then the wall thickness is going to increase, right? You're going to have a much thicker wall, and so you're going to have a stiffer sway bar. Likewise, if the outer diameter increases, then again you're going to have a thicker sway bar, and so you're going to have stiffer handling characteristics from it. So if you go back to our chart, you'll notice, for example, for the RX-8 sway bars on the rears, and if you look just at these values, you'll notice the outer diameter is the same. It's the inner diameter that's different. So as you kind of work up the ranks, the wall thickness increases, and that's why you're going to have the different handling characteristics. So let's talk about our baseline. stock NC, MX-5, or Miata sway bar thickness. That's going to be 21-ish millimeters on the front, 12-ish millimeters on the rear. I say ish because all of these sway bars are painted, and they would have seen quite a bit of use and wearing. So depending on the thickness of paint, you might see these diameters vary by up to 0.5 millimeters. And it's going to be marked with a blue dot. Now a quick moment to talk about what these dots are referring to. You would have heard about red dots, yellow dots, orange dots for RX-8 bars. What does all that mean? Well, if we look at a typical sway bar or anti-roll bar, depending on what you want to call it, it's going to look something like this, right? And if you look on kind of like the corners near the bends or kind of along the side arms here in this area here, you're going to see a small little spot of paint that's in those respective colors. The sway bar itself is going to be painted black, and on these arms you'll find a small dab of paint. And depending on the color of that paint, you can identify what kind of sway bars they are, either from an NC, MX-5, or Miata, or from the RX-8. Now for the NC, MX-5, or Miata, there'll be a small dab of blue paint on these areas. On the RX-8s, you'll find red, yellow, or orange paint dabbed onto either of these arms around about there. Now I've also included, by the way, what sort of vehicles you can source these from, and of course the diameter information. The reason is, if you're going on the used market, you're going to find that for a lot of these older sway bars, these spots of paint is going to be faded, and you're not going to be able to identify them just from these dots alone. So instead, you're going to have to look up the history of the vehicle that it was pulled out of, find out what kind of vehicle it came from, and or measure the diameter. If you can't go and measure it in person, then contact the seller, ask them if they can take some measurements for you. So let's talk about them. First off, we've got the softest sway bars. That's the red dot ones for the RX-8. You're going to find these in most automatic RX-8s and also on base model vehicles. There may be some variations to what I've written in this column here, depending on your local market and the sort of grades and options that were sold in your local market. But generally, automatics and base model RX-8s will have the red dot sway bars on both the fronts and the rears. The next step up is going to be for the sport suspension package on the earlier RX-8. So that's going to be the yellow dot. And you'll find these on 6-speed manual vehicles and earlier, meaning 08 and earlier, sport suspension package equipped RX-8s. And then the hardest ones are going to be the orange dot sway bars, which are found on 6-speed manual RX-8s of the later model, 09 and later, and or later model RX-8s with the sport suspension package. In terms of how easy these are to find and also what they cost, the easiest to find are going to be the red dots, and these are typically the cheapest. Then that would be followed by the yellow dots, and then the orange dots tend to be the hardest to find, and they're, depending on where you are, they can be pretty pricey. It might even be more financially feasible to go completely aftermarket, and you'll get very similar performance out of, say, for example, front H&R on the softest setting. Now, I do need to also let you know about one thing concerning the rear RX-8 sway bars in terms of their shape. For the earlier and later models, there is a bit of a difference. In terms of how they behave, the handling characteristics, there's no difference, but there is a difference, I think, which is just cosmetic. It's how they look. If you look at the rear RX-8 sway bars for the earlier model, it's going to have like this V-shaped kink down the middle. It's kind of looks something like this. And the reason is so that there's space for the exhaust pipe to pass here through this area here. The later model RX-8's rear sway bars, instead of a kink, they've got like this M shape. So it kind of curves on the end and then goes straight across and then curves around again. And the thickness and the handling characteristics, from what I've heard from having spoken to owners who have these sway bars in their cars, there's no noticeable difference. I think it's just cosmetic, and for me personally, I prefer this M-shaped one rather than the V-shaped one. The V isn't even symmetrical. It's kind of like skewed to one side. And so I just preferred the later style rear RX-8 sway bar because of the symmetry. So that's what I've got in my car. If you're fussy about the appearance, that's something you want to think about. If you don't really care, you'd probably just go for whatever you can get your hands on for cheaper. So we've talked about your options and how to find them, but which ones should you actually get for your car? Let's have a look over at this other chart that I've made, and I'll give you a better idea of what you actually want. So as we get stiffer with our sway bars, you're also going to have a kind of quicker traction breakaway mid-corner. So the kind of how progressively the tires start to lose traction is going to come a bit more suddenly with stiffer sway bars than you'd get with softer sway bars. You're going to have also more NVH, more noise, vibration, and harshness as you get stiffer. So those are the compromises that you might be making with stiffer sway bars. The kind of more desirable effect that you're trying to get with stiffer sway bars is reduced body roll. The benefits of this reduced body roll is going to be something that you're going to experience with minimal compromises on a very smoothly paved track, basically, rather than on public roads. Public roads, you probably want to get something a little bit softer, or you probably want to kind of limit to what extent you make these compromises. So with that in mind, when we're looking at the red, yellow, and orange bars from the RX-8, orange is going to be kind of super thick, super stiff, and probably something that you'd only want to use for track driving, for high-speed track driving. And then the reds and yellows are kind of going to be closer to that sweet spot if you have a daily driven vehicle. So the columns represent the fronts, the rows represent the rears, and we're looking at these combinations. The green dots represent understeer. The red dots here in this chart represent oversteer. And if we look at our baseline, our stock, how it is from the factory, so long as you have a matching front and rear set, so if it's stock NC MX-5 front and rears, you're gonna have very slight understeer. And then if it's RX-8 red bars, both front and rear, again, you're gonna have the same slight understeer. And the same for yellow, yellow, front and rear, slight understeer, orange, orange, front and rear, you have slight understeer. So that's gonna give you that kind of factory handling characteristic. Now, for me personally, I prefer a more neutral feeling handling characteristic with maybe a slight lean towards oversteer. Now, what I've shown with these kind of growing dot sizes is how much understeer or oversteer you get with these combinations. So for example, if you go, the thickest possible front sway bar with the stock NC rear sway bar, you're going to get tons of understeer, which I've shown with this, really fat, thick green dot. And if you do the opposite, if you go super thick on the rear sway bar and then you stick with your skinny stock NC front sway bar, you're going to get this huge amounts of oversteer, which I've shown with this fat, chunky red circle over here. So what's in this chart is just a baseline. You can further dial in your suspension and handling characteristics through changes to your tires, your wheels, your shock absorbers, your springs, all of that. And even if you're using adjustable sway bars, you can really dial things in. But as a baseline, this is how the sway bar combination is going to affect your handling characteristics. Now, to get what you're looking for, you'd probably want to first go on some forums and see what various owners who have these combinations say about their handling characteristics. Make sure to also take into account what kind of tires and wheels they're running, what kind of coilovers or springs and shock absorbers they're running, to get a better idea of how the entire system is working together. Now, what do I personally recommend? I would recommend staying somewhere in this ballpark here. Meaning, if you're gonna get any combination at all, maybe get a matched front and rear set, or go with a rear sway bar that's just one step stiffer than the fronts. So if you have reds on the fronts, then go with a yellow on the rear. If you've got yellows on the fronts, then go with, say, an orange on the rear. If you're looking for a neutral handling characteristic with just that tiny bit of oversteer. And that's, for me personally, what I like. Now, as for installation, the installation for the rears is super simple. It's just undoing a couple of bolts, very easily accessible, just with regular hand tools. When it comes to swapping the front sway bar on NC MX-5s and Miatas, it's a real pain in the rear end. I've got a video that goes into how I did it. I wouldn't really call it a how-to video, but it's definitely something that you're gonna find really useful when trying to take on the project yourself. In the description below, I've detailed the part numbers for the different RX-8 sway bars, as well as the part numbers for the bushings and the bushing brackets that you're gonna need. As for the end links, good news is they're the same for the NC MX-5 and all of the RX-8s. So the current end links that you have in your NC, if they're in good condition, you can reuse those. Depending on the RX-8 sway bars that you get, you might be able to reuse the bushing brackets as well, but check the description for details on that. By the way, did you know that NC MX-5s and Miatas in Europe, including in left-hand drive markets such as Germany, had factory Recaros as an option? Now, I actually have another video about everything you need to know about NC MX-5 or Miata seats and swapping them. Make sure you check that video out. One bit of information I didn't include there is whether or not there are left-hand drive versions of the factory Recaro seats. And turns out there are. If you want to get a set of factory Recaros for your left-hand drive NC MX-5 or Miata, try and source them from Europe, where they have left-hand drive vehicles, such as Germany, for example. For more details on all the other stuff you need to know, put those seats into your vehicle that didn't originally come with them, make sure you check out the other video that I have. Now, if you want a detailed breakdown, step-by-step guide on how to set up and tune your suspension to be perfect for you, and remember, nobody else can tune your suspension to be perfect for you other than you, because there is a subjective element to suspension tuning. I'd be happy to show you how and make it so simple that any lay person can do it on their own. If you want to see a video like that or a series of videos like that to really get into suspension tuning, make sure you drop a like on this video and subscribe so you don't miss out on the video when it does come out. Catch you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.